Hello, my name is Victor Anderson. I'm Editor-in-Chief of Waters Magazine and Waters Technology. I'm at the InfoPro Digital Studios in Piccadilly, London, and I have with me today Roy Kirby, who is Senior Product Manager for SIX Financial Information. Roy, welcome and thanks for being with us today. Let's talk about the specific regulatory challenges facing capital markets firms over the next 12 to 18 months. What is SIX's take on that perspective?
Okay, so thanks for inviting me here today, first of all. I think SIX's take on it actually at the moment is in the next 12 to 18 months, there could be a rest period for us. There are some big regulations still coming through. So there are some big regulations that are going to hit. But I think what we've seen is lots of the regulations are actually now formed. They've been exposed to the industry. The industry is starting to get to grips with them. So we see that actually the industry at the moment can start to pause and think about what it's done so far, how compliant they are, which regulations they've hit, sort of almost take a little step back and have a little rest period.
Now, look, I know that we're in the new kind of the MiFID II dispensation. It's a big change, but it's not like we are getting to January the 3rd and saying, okay, now we take off all of the accelerator. It's an ongoing thing, and it's going to be an ongoing thing for a lengthy period of time, right?
Yes.
So do you want to just talk, you said there are a number of regulations. Do you want to talk just very briefly about what regulations you're referring to? And then we'll go on to the second part, the second question, which is the challenges facing capital markets firms in terms of their approach to complying with those regulations.
Yes, I think we can look at regulatory themes. So we look now at themes, and we think that's the way that the industry should look at it. You mentioned MiFID II. Yes, MiFID II is a regulation. People have set up projects to hit MiFID II. It will go live. People will be ready. But there's a bigger theme around investor protection, which is not just MiFID II, it's around documentation, the exchange of information, the protection of the end investor. So what we see now a time for companies to look at those themes. So investor protection would be one, taxation would be another. So there's lots of regulation around taxation. So investor protection, regulation, know your customer, onboarding, those types of things. We see a lot of overlap between individual regulations that people, again, I sort of said it earlier, people have dealt with it project by project wise. I think in the next 12 to 18 months, people need to look at how those regulations overlap, how they fit together. And yes, they're currently regulatory compliant, but how can they reuse some of the information? How can they simplify to get away from some of the duplication that they've put into data, processes, people, those sorts of areas?
Okay. Well, that actually leads me into my second question to you, rather nicely, in fact, and that is large numbers of capital markets firms' regulatory frameworks can best be described as kind of spaghetti. So what are the typical challenges that they face as a result of addressing compliance in a very kind of haphazard, piecemeal, case-by-case type fashion?
Yeah, it's a very good point, and it's a term that we use as well. I think what you end up with when you end up with this piecemeal approach and this project-by-project approach is you end up with silos. So you end up almost with compliance or regulatory silos within an organization. Now that can be within departments or within geographies. But when you end up with silos, you do end up with people not speaking to each other. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges is, anecdotally, we've had people come to us to talk about investor protection from their investment bank, from their asset management arm, from the UK, from the US, from Europe. And sometimes they've got 5 people working on the same thing. Now, if you've got a silo, people tend to focus on their little silo. They need to break out of that and start talking to each other a little bit more.
Good. So I think the majority of people would identify data as being the kind of the crux, the heart of their regulatory initiatives, really. So So to what extent do sound, well-defined data management practices and or disciplines allow capital markets firms to respond to current and future, and I suppose this is the key, the future regulatory mandates?
Yeah, I think they're core. I think that data is at the core of everything. I think what we've seen in the last 2 years, maybe, and ongoing in the future is the industry coming together to say, what are the key pieces of data that we need? But what are the key reference points for those pieces of data as well? What are the standards that we need to look at? If the regulator hasn't given us a standard, how can we come together as an industry? So that's the financial players, it's the regulators, it's vendors, and say, here is a standard that we can all communicate on. And I think that's really the core of the data, is making sure that the standards are in place. There only needs to be a few, but there need to be some standards in place that we can all agree on so that we can report and interact in the same way. And are we there yet? No, we're there in a few areas, but we just need to keep going on that.
Okay. Okay, so Roy, final question to you. We talked about the data. Let's talk about data providers now. So to what extent can selecting and partnering with a single data provider help capital markets firms streamline and simplify to a large extent their regulatory practices?
I just pick up on a word there, single. I don't think there will ever be a single. Right. I think you have to have partners. And I think in this day and age, it is talking to a provider who wants to partner with you, but would partner with other providers as well.
Yeah.
So, and I think that's going to be really important, because there are two ways of doing things. You can take big hose pipes of information. You can take big analytic servers, data management platforms. That's fine for the big guys. They can do that. They've got the budgets. They've got chief data officers. They can control everything. But the small to medium players need us as an industry, the vendors, to partner together to actually come up with some regulatory ready packages for them. So I would say that the industry needs to sort of interact a little bit more, push us, ask us for more, ask us for those packages so that we can meet the regulations together.
And I suppose just a final point before we leave it, and that is, if an organization, a small to medium-sized business, partners with an organization like yours, for example, there is one relationship. You are managing the relationships with multiple vendors as well, but it takes a huge amount of kind of day-to-day headache away from them just by having a single kind of provider, as opposed to dealing with maybe 10 or 15 of them, right?
That's exactly it. And those small to medium-sized customers can look at us and look at us as, we like to think of ourselves as thought leaders in many ways. We have lots of interaction points with regulators. We're part of the ANA Service Bureau. We set standards around ISINs. So, and we have, a huge number of experts that people can rely on. So that's absolutely correct. Pick somebody who is good at regulation and compliance.
Right. Good. Okay, Roy, let's leave it there. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for getting on a plane and
no problem.
To spend some time with us today in London. As I mentioned, my name is Victor Anderson. I'm editor of Waters Magazine, Waters Technology. There will be additional video clips from Six Financial Information on this website, and also you can go to Six Financial Information as well, and there will be additional information pertaining to the issues that we discussed on the Six website. I look forward to catching up with you in the not too distant future.